How long do you think the trial's going to last?
Well, I mean, Trump's going to do everything he can to delay that trial. So if the trial does start today, that's probably a 3 or 4 week trial if there's no delays. But Trump will try to delay that trial. He'll try to find ways to delay the trial.
And will he give evidence on oath, do you think?
There's absolutely no chance that he'll do that. He has said that repeatedly. He said that he would do that with Mueller when he was sitting president. He has said that. So he has a certain playbook. His playbook is, of course, I'll testify. Of course, I'll testify. He has never once testified. He's probably got 3,000 or 4,000 lawsuits that have been put up against him from contractors and people he hasn't paid. And he's probably got 3,000 or 4,000 lawsuits that he's actually the plaintiff in the lawsuit. He always says he's going to testify. He always says he's going to testify.
Can he be made to testify?
Well, he can't be made to testify because in the United States, you have the right to remain silent and you have the right to not call yourself as a witness. And of course, the prosecutor can't call you because you have the right not to incriminate yourself.
And just to be
in
clear,
a criminal trial.
Just to be clear, I mean, the evidence in this case will not be salacious evidence to do with his relationship with Stormy Daniels because it's in a sense, a sort of technical prosecution about how campaign funds were used. It's not actually about whether or not he had a relationship with Stormy Daniels.
He broke the law, and then he broke the law. And
but
then
the point I'm making is this is not a prosecution about him and Stormy Daniels.
No,
it's a prosecution about how money was used.
I don't like the case. I mean, listen, I don't like him, but I don't like the case. It's not the best of the 4 cases. But this guy has a lot of luck, Donald Trump. Over 50 years, he's gotten away with a lot of interesting things. And the fact that this is the big case, meaning the first case, is overshadowing more damning cases. So,
but it's interesting. It's the first. It's funny you say that because I've always thought that the sort of this trial was the unlooked at trial, the overseen. Anyway, people are not paying enough attention to it because it could result in the first proper conviction, and that's significant.
Well, I think it's significant, and I think he does get convicted. Alvin Bragg, who is an accomplished attorney, would never be bringing this case if he didn't think he could convict Donald Trump. And remember, he's got to be convicted in front of 12 jurors. His people will say, well, those are jurors in New York that dislike him. It's a left-leaning or a blue state. But even still, you have a presumption of innocence in a criminal court case. But the evidence is overwhelming. And so he likely gets convicted. You see, he could have pled out on that case, and he could have gotten a fine or he could have gotten some type of misdemeanor sentence in his orientation. He didn't want to do that. He thought that this was good for him politically, and it has been on the margin good for him politically. He's raised money off the case. He calls it lawfare, meaning these are prosecutors going after him to stop him from returning to the presidency, as opposed to just the plain and simple fact that he went over the line and broke the law. And so, he's raised money. It's helped him in the polls. If you look at every time these indictments come down, he ticks up in the polls. But he's ticking up in the polls with a much smaller group of people. So just for the UK listeners, in the United States, the largest registrant group is the independents. So the parties have fallen out of favor with the American people. You have 41% of the people registered now declaring themselves independent. Low 30s for the Democrats, roughly 32.5%. Republicans now are below 30%. They're at the 28% number, and they're declining. And this is primarily because Trump has hijacked that party.
We haven't got long left, Anthony. I'm dying to get your view, obviously, on the election coming forward because everything you're describing there.
Trump's going to lose.
Look, can you not do the big reveal before I've asked the question?
It's pretty obvious. I mean, he's going to lose. If you want me to, just tell me how much.
Explain why.
Just tell me how much time we have left. I'm looking at the clock here. Tell me how much time we have left.
It's a very interesting social experiment. We've got 3 minutes to tell Times Radio listeners why Trump will lose. And who knows, maybe half will be disappointed and half will be happy.
Well, I mean, Trump's going to lose for a number of different reasons, but the main reason
By the way, I'm happy about that.
His base is smaller. It's louder, but it's smaller. Number 2, he has no money. He can't raise the money that he used to raise. He told a very big lie about the money that he raised 2 weekends ago at John Paulson's house.
That's the former head of Goldman.
No, John Paulson. That's Henry Paulson. John Paulson is Paulson Investments, but he's a billionaire hedge fund manager. but he's going to lose because he doesn't have the money, and you're getting 5 field offices for Joe Biden to every 1 field office for Donald Trump in the swing states that matter to settle the U.S. election. And then remember the last piece here, there's a very large group of former Republicans that are going to be arguing the case against him. And radio's fun for me. I'll be doing it in all the swing states, explaining to the people I grew up with, because I grew up in a blue-collar family. My parents didn't go to college. I'll be explaining to them the systemic danger of Trump, and he's going to lose.
How much? Let's just look at this Stormy Daniels case. How much jeopardy do you think Donald Trump is in?
If this were not being tried in New York by a jury, which was 85% voted against Donald Trump, there'd be no jeopardy. This is the weakest criminal case I've seen in 60 years of practicing, teaching, and writing about criminal law. They try to turn a state misdemeanor into a felony by claiming that the reason he paid the money was to violate federal law, but the federal government refused to prosecute. So this is an extraordinarily weak case in front of a very, very strong anti-Trump jury. We'll know better tomorrow when we see how much the judge allows questions to the jury. Right now, the questions are something like this. Do you have such strong feelings against Donald Trump that it would make it impossible for you to render a fair verdict? Well, no juror is going to say it's impossible to render a fair verdict. So we're likely to get a jury that's inclined to convict. So the likely outcome is a conviction before the election and then a reversal of the conviction after the election. Look, I'm not a Trump supporter. I'm going to be voting for Biden and opposed to Donald Trump. But I care deeply about civil liberties and about the criminal justice system and not weaponizing it. And this is the weakest of the 4 cases against Donald Trump.
Okay, so nonetheless, you think he might be convicted on this. Would that mean that he would go to prison straight away?
No, nobody. First of all, nobody has ever in the history of the United States, since Alexander Hamilton paid hush money to prevent his adulterous affair with a married woman from coming out, nobody in history, I suspect nobody in British or American history, has ever been put in jail for failing to report a non-disclosure hush money payment on a corporate form. No, I don't think he would ever get prison time, but he would get a conviction, and that could affect the election. Polls show that voters in the middle are going to be influenced by the outcome of 12 jurors in New York. That seems foolish, but that seems a likely result, and that certainly is the intended result. Remember, the DA ran on a platform to try to get Trump. I wrote a book called Get Trump. It was not an original title with me. It was the campaign promises. Many in Great Britain don't understand, and understandably don't understand, what being an elected prosecutor means in the United States. We may be the only country in the world that elects prosecutors and elects judges. We have quite deliberately turned our legal system into a political system. And so we're not getting a prosecutor who's interested in justice here. We're getting a prosecutor who's interested in being reelected.
So is it, in your view, therefore, okay to pay someone a lot of money to stop them revealing embarrassing material about you?
It's perfectly legal. It's also perfectly permissible for voters to take that and hold it against them. If you have nothing to hide, why are you paying money? That's perfectly okay, but it's not a crime. And one of the problems we have in the United States is the line between what we think is immoral and what is illegal has becoming very blurry, but it's the most important line imaginable. You are entitled to do things that are wrong as long as you don't cross the line into criminality. And this line, as reflected by this case, has virtually disappeared. So if there is a conviction, it's very likely to be reversed on appeal because there is really no crime here. And if there is a crime, it's a state misdemeanor turned into a felony by an improper use of a federal crime, which the federal government didn't prosecute. Also, the state of New York has no jurisdiction over prosecuting federal crimes.
It seems that Donald Trump was making faces and smirking during the questioning of a potential juror when the juror was asked about social media posts or being on social media, something about Facebook. And Donald Trump, I heard that it was visible, the facial expressions that he was making, and also that he was smirking a bit. And Judge Merchan definitely at that moment, once the juror was excused, I believe, had warned Donald Trump that he cannot intimidate any of these jurors.
Am I right in saying there was also a moment where the judge required some of the jury candidates' previous comments on social media about Trump to be read out? And the reason a lot of people have picked up on that is because it might have been one of the first times that Donald Trump has heard such direct criticism of him or such direct comments about him.
So you have to think Donald Trump is forced to be in that courtroom. It's not like he can get up and leave. So you have people that are being questioned about their views about Donald Trump to determine whether they can be a fair and impartial juror. And some of these views are not positive. You know, a lot of these views are negative. So these comments are being read in court. And just to be clear, what's happening is that during this jury selection, it seems that Donald Trump has a jury consultant or people that are assisting his attorneys. And what they're doing as each juror is being questioned, they're searching that potential juror on social media to see if they have any public open social media accounts and what they have commented in doing these days and in the past to determine whether they may have certain views about Donald Trump or this case.
And just to give you a flavour of some of them, according to the Times, one of them was "Get him out and lock him up." Another had posted a satirical headline declaring Republicans projected to pick up 70 seats in prison. So that's the kind of thing we're talking about. Talk us through the timeline from here, Bernarda. Once the jury is selected, how will things proceed?
So once a jury is selected, and I believe that we should have a jury by Friday. If not, I think the latest on Monday or Tuesday of next week. Now, when they call the witness, the prosecution will ask the questions. After the prosecution asks questions, the defense attorneys will have an opportunity to cross-examine those witnesses. And then ultimately, the judge will ask Donald Trump's attorney whether they will be presenting any evidence at this trial. Now, here in the United States, defendants do not have to present evidence. They do not have to present witnesses, and the defendant does not have to testify in a criminal trial. But ultimately, it's their decision.
I'm taking we've had no indication so far as to whether Donald Trump will take the witness stand himself.
No, not at all. No indication at all. And by law, they don't have to notify the court at this point whether he wants to testify. They can wait to the very last minute, right before he makes that decision to get on the stand and testify. But if it's my bet, if I were his attorney, I would not put Donald Trump on the stand. Absolutely not.
Why is that? Because he'd be a bad witness? Is he just not the kind of temperamental character that would make a good witness?
It's that combination of both. Is that his temperament, you won't be able to control what he says. He doesn't make a good witness. He's made so many statements that he can be confronted with. He's also made so many public announcements and posts and just in general, the things that he has said in the public can come out and he can be cross-examined on that on the stand. And also, you can't control what comes out of Donald Trump's mouth. So while you put Donald Trump on the stand and his attorney, yes, will start asking him the questions, direct examination, and you will hope that it's controlled and, he'll answer the question. But then the defense attorney has to sit down and it's up to the prosecutor now to cross-examine him. And his defense attorney can't come and save him and be like, stop, let's stop this proceeding. Let me talk to my client. Doesn't work like that. So you can't control a man like Donald Trump. And when you're dealing with a jury trial where we have jurors that are making the decision about your guilt, you don't want to put a wild card like that on the stand.
The first question, of course, is how it will come out, and we can't know that. And one thing that any experienced trial lawyer will tell you is that regardless of how strong you think the facts may be, when you put the resolution of a case in the hands of 12 lay jurors, you can't possibly know how it will turn out. And particularly in the case of a defendant like Mr. Trump, who inspires both considerable loyalty and a considerable loathing on the part of members of the general public, you can't possibly predict how a group of 12 of them will decide. And to convict him, you have to have jury unanimity. So if he either were to be acquitted, which I think is improbable, or even get a hung jury, he's going to declare that this is a great victory. Now, the interesting question is also, well, what happens if he's convicted? there's a legal side of that and a political side. One would have expected long ago that the plethora of legal problems that Mr. Trump has would have a large effect on his political standing. They haven't so far. But I do think that a criminal conviction would make some significant difference at the margins. Not that his political support would collapse. There is a significant portion of the population that simply believes him when they say it's all political. It's all a vast conspiracy against him.
Could he actually end up in jail, do you think?
I think if he, I don't know about in this case, but I think if he is not elected president and if he is convicted in one or more of the other cases, I think there's a reasonable chance he'll do jail time. Yes, I mean this case is perhaps less serious than the others, but certainly the other three, the one in Georgia and the two federal cases, are very serious charges. And anybody other than a former president of the United States, if they were convicted of those charges, they'd be sent to prison for some period.
It's a bit astonishing that he's going for a criminal trial that could end up with him being in prison, but it's really not astonishing that he's going to trial. He's been to trial now twice. He's lost both of them disastrously. He testified in both of them. He apparently made a bombastic and terrible impression. He probably upped the civil award against himself by the bad impression that he made on the jurors. In one of the cases, it was a jury trial. And so I think he probably hasn't learned his lesson too much, but he's trying to thread the needle where he doesn't infuriate the jury and he somehow appeals to them. And I think his charm seems to work in some of the swing states and with his base. But, I'm from New York myself, and I don't get the supposed charm that he has, but he's going to try to charm the jury. He may even testify if Michael Cohen goes in pretty well and the trial otherwise goes poorly for him. He might just, Hail Mary, take the stand. I'm a criminal defense attorney. And, I've called a client of mine in desperate circumstances, and in a couple of cases, they made a very good impression. I mean, it is tough when you look the jurors right in the eye, if you have any kind of charm or persuasive ability, and you say, I didn't do it. I was worried about my wife. I didn't want my wife to come home and scream and throw pots and pans at me, and this was not going to help with my wife. I didn't want her to find out. Can you understand that? I didn't want my wife to find out. Campaign schmampaign, right?
Certain and respectful of the jury system, where if you're found guilty, you're viewed as guilty. And so here you have like 4 in 10 Republicans who say these are very serious charges. And so a lot of these people are supported Nikki Haley in the primary, and he has shown no interest in wanting to expand his voter base. And so I think that's this could be Biden's saving grace, because you could use this in ads saying, does America really want a felon in charge of our nuclear codes, for example?
If she'd never signed the NDA and she'd never taken the hush money, we wouldn't be having this court case. It is sort of interesting, but I will say also it is seen as potentially the weakest of the 4 criminal cases that he's facing. So it's interesting that Anthony Scaramucci was saying he thinks that there will be a conviction. The experts seem to be pretty split on that, because it isn't seen as the hardest and the most robust of the 4 cases, but it is the only one that will likely come to court before the election, and that's why it's very significant.
And is Stormy Daniels herself, and forgive me if you don't know the answer to this, does she feel vulnerable and worried about her prospects?
She's felt vulnerable since she started speaking out in 2018, and she's felt particularly vulnerable since last March when Trump was indicted. I spoke to her hours afterwards, and she had been receiving the most monumental and graphic death threats, rape threats, threats to her daughter's life, threats to her husband's life, people scaling the walls of her property. She has been physically and psychologically put under an enormous amount of pressure. And then also under pressure from Donald Trump. There's another complicated bit of the case. She has been asked to pay debts for his legal fees in a defamation case. And they've been putting a lot of pressure on her for that. So I think she doesn't feel necessarily afraid of facing Trump in court, but what has made her understandably feel quite anxious and nervous about the results is, the huge outpouring of violence and aggression towards her.
I very much doubt that they're going to put a former president in jail. It's just not realistic. Worst case scenario, he gets convicted, has to serve some sort of time. Don't forget, he has Secret Service protection. So there's some speculation that he could be, kind of under house arrest, so to speak, in Mar-a-Lago. It's not going to happen. Donald Trump's going to appeal a verdict if it is a guilty one, which, we're not there yet. They're still trying to select a jury today. And there's so many hurdles to jump through that I'd be very surprised if this results in jail, but it could result in a guilty verdict against Donald Trump, because there's a lot of documentary evidence to the effect that he did use business money to pay off Stormy Daniels using an intermediary, Michael Cohen, whose testimony is going to come under severe scrutiny. Cohen used to be a lieutenant for Trump. He's now turned to the other side. But Cohen has served jail time himself for this. So Donald Trump's going to have a hard time avoiding a guilty verdict as long as a fair jury is selected. And of course, it's very difficult to get anybody in New York who doesn't have a firm opinion about Donald Trump one way or the other.
Well, I don't think anybody knows. We're in totally uncharted territory. We've never had a former U.S. president, or sitting U.S. president for that matter, indicted. And I'm just not sure what the reaction will be. It may be that people simply confirmed in their own already positive or negative views of Trump. It may well be. One can only hope that hearing weeks of testimony about how he paid hush money to a porn star and then cooked his company's books to conceal it will tell people a little bit about the character of Donald Trump. That may have a negative effect, but he will also use it as a forum. He's not being pushed off the campaign trail. He's got a campaign trail right outside the courtroom. So I think it's very hard to predict the actual political impact.